Hi, today we are going to be talking about number 13, Death. This is, of course, the card that most people fear, or at least lay people fear. Um, and it is, of course, it is kind of scary. We have a big skeleton, clearly, who is crowned with a scythe. And we are told that he is at the bottom of the ocean. It is a depiction of Osiris, um, essentially, though in the waters in which he died. Um, One of the legends goes, I think, that Crowley was getting at, was that Osiris was drowned in order to be killed. But of course, the myth that most people know of is the one in which Set or Seth, his brother, Set uh, chops him to little pieces, basically, and first of all locks him up in a sarcophagus. That's sort of the myth surrounding the origin of the sarcophagus. And of course, these are things worth Wikipediaing, but the idea is always that Osiris's body was then put in the Nile, um, that uh, that it was basically put in this sarcophagus. And I believe the myth goes that it was just kind of thrown in the river, and it ended up washing up um, someplace. For I'm sorry, I didn't look into this before I started this. Maybe I should have, because I didn't realize I was going to be talking about this myth, but it is important. Um, but it washes up somewhere and it gets turned into a column of someone's palace. And Isis, Osiris's wife, goes all over Egypt looking for his body so that she can give him a proper burial. And she finds it turned into this column in this king's palace. And so she takes it, I believe, or what is it? Either she takes it and some mishap happens where Set gets to it, I think, before she does. And that I think is when he decides to dismember all the body parts and scatter them across Egypt. And so basically she has to go on another quest recollecting the body parts. And finally, the last body part she needs to make his body complete is his penis. And his penis yeah, penis. His penis was apparently swallowed by a fish. And this leads me to the letter for this card. The letter for this card is Nun, the letter N, and Nun means a fish. Haha. So, this card for esotericists of the 19th and early 20th centuries um, were very interested in this connection between death, the death card, and Osiris's legend, and about Osiris's phallus in particular. That the fish is a direct symbol of Osiris's fertility as a dying god. Now, dying gods are, of course, solar, excuse me, and are situated at the number 6 on the Tree of Life, Tiphareth, um, which is, of course, beauty. But in Tiphareth is also conceptualized Christ. And of course, Osiris is the precursor to Christ, and any other kind of redemptive, uh, resurrective god in Mediterranean culture. So really, when the early Christians even came up with the idea of Christ, or other mystery cults for that matter, because of course there wasn't just one dying, redemptive, resurrective God at the time. If you've done any research on that period, as far as religion is concerned, you know that there were several, that this was kind of the gimmick, this was in vogue at the time, and Christ really is more of a novelty than anything else. It really is all different mythology trying to express the same general idea. This is not to say that Christ is invalid as a deity. It just means that I think what I'm getting at is more that, you know, the specificity of any of these deities is really irrelevant. It's just an idea that is important. And this idea is directly connected to death. The death card is connected to Tiphareth rather, on the Tree of Life. It is the what is this? The 24th path that connects Tiphareth to number 7, Netzach, which is victory. We've talked a little bit about Netzach. It's on the right-hand pillar of the Tree of Life, so it is considered positive. Even though it is associated with Venus, it is still basically a masculine Sephirah. It's kind of interesting, I mean, because of course being Venus related, it's feminine as well. It's kind of, both Hod and Netzach have this interesting hermaphroditic aspect to them, especially Hod, because Hod is the planet Mercury, but this is an aside, of course, because it has nothing to do with the death card. But the death card, I think if we well, I think the other important thing is that this card is the sign of Scorpio, and Scorpio is traditionally the sign of sexuality and death. That death in ancient culture is, and in Renaissance culture as well, death is very much seen as synonymous with sex. That the release of orgasm is synonymous with death. In a lot of Renaissance poetry, it became in fashion to, you know, write poems about, oh, let me die, you know, let me die 1,000 times a day. Clearly, you know, lymphomaniacs, or whatever, what the heck is the word I want? Nymphomaniacs. Yes, lymphomaniacs. No, sorry. Word snafu. Nymphomaniacs is the word I wanted. But yes, they wanted to die 1,000 times a day, and that literally meant I want to copulate, for lack of a better word, 1,000 times a day. So, so that sense of orgasm, that sense of opening up to the other, the sense of otherness, is not only is it a generative act, but it's also a destructive act. It's a self-destructive act. So it is the idea almost of begetting and heritage, and I think that's also connected to the fish. The fish being a symbol also of semen. I know this is getting into nitty-gritty territory here that you wouldn't necessarily expect with tarot, but because we're talking about Aleister Crowley's tarot, this stuff is bound to come up. And it's just the process of life. I'm not talking about this in a way that's supposed to be scandalous. It's just what the card represents. The fish is a representation or symbol of semen traveling through the woman's body into the womb, essentially, because they swim, of course. So it is fish-like. You know, of course, these videos had to get slightly funny eventually. But anywho, so that is another aspect of the fish. And that being said, it is connected to inheritance and almost this essence of lineage. And this is important because we also get the serpent here on this card. We are told that Scorpio has 3 different forms. That Scorpio is depicted as the scorpion here, the serpent slash fish. We are also told that the fish and the serpent, rather, are the same thing, that they're the same symbol, or rather they mean the same thing. And the eagle. The eagle is the most exalted form of Scorpio. This is death that, the eagle represents death that is sublime. That is the, well, it's very similar to the universe card because of the universe card's connection to Bina and this card's connection to Bina. Bina is known as also, the 50 gates of death. And so death is very much connected to the idea of Bina, that understanding of God leads to death, that one cannot directly contemplate the face of God without dying, without the destruction of the ego. And so that is essentially what we're getting here with the eagle. The eagle is to be subsumed in Godhead, whereas the serpent and the fish is more about general change, the idea of flux and positive and negative, and that life is a serpent, life with a capital L. Life or existence is really the interaction between the polarity between conscious living and the sleep of death, so to speak. That life and death are two curves of the same serpent life. And Crowley writes that also in the Book of Thoth. Whereas the Scorpio, the scorpion on the bottom, is the lowest form of death. He is situated between Alpha and Omega, and the first and the last. And essentially, the legend goes that when the scorpion is ringed by fire or is in a situation in which it thinks it cannot escape, it stabs itself to death. It stings itself and poisons itself. And so here the scorpion is seen as the gross side of death. It's the illusion side of death, the part of death that seems finite, that essentially it's a suicidal idea, that beings that are confused by ignorance are essentially led to believe that when they die, they die. And so that fear of death, that inescapable situation, of life, it's like, okay, you're here and you inevitably have to die. That inescapable aspect of living is what causes us to actually kill ourselves out of fear, that we suppress life and die to some extent. We diminish our capability in the name of something that this card would tell us is not, or this hieroglyph rather would tell us, is not true, because of the serpent and the fish. The idea that each of our incarnations, this is a very related to incarnation type of card, that essentially all the forms that we decide to take, all these bubbles represent different forms of the same essence, which is the Osirian character here. Osiris here is depicted as black because black is the color of Saturn, and that's also the explanation for his scythe. And as we were just saying, Bina is the mother of death as much as she is the mother of life, and Bina is associated with the god Saturn. So we are seeing a conglomeration of essentially the Sephiroth, Bina and Tiphareth, the mother and the son, kind of conjoined in a way, which is kind of an interesting thought. I've never really thought of it that way, but it sort of makes sense. If you think of the path that connects the mother and the son, you have the lovers and that kind of initial sexual attraction between opposites and the necessary attraction of opposites. Death is in some ways the precursor to art, which is the fusion of opposites and is the complement of the lover's card. So death is very much connected to both of those ideas, and again, getting back to the idea of orgasm being generated by the attraction between two opposing forces. But the idea is that Osiris here is our essential divine incarnate self, that this is our Christ-like consciousness that is eternal. This is the true will, basically, in action of the self, of the eternal self. And every form that it decides to take is ultimately, or rather on the bubbles, every form that it decides to take, even though one may appear to die, really it's all mutations of the same idea, the same essence, so that that single idea, that single willpower can work itself to the full extent of its ability. The idea is that we are not allowed rest or true death until we have exhausted the potential of our true will. And really, determining this, I think, or when this is going to happen, is incredibly difficult to say. It's a very long process. I think this is sort of the idea of sainthood and canonization, that a real saint is an individual who we know, or who had confirmation, spiritual confirmation, that their true will was complete, that their reason for existing in any way, shape, or form was done, and therefore they had no more attachments to the world. Attachment is a result, to some extent, is a result of needing to fulfill a course in life. This we talked about in adjustment. But death is that idea that lets us let go of those things. It is the card of unattachment and dissolving, dissolution. And of course, we remember the joy of dissolution is all in the Book of the Law. You know, that dissolution is a joy, again, an orgasmic type experience, but the dissolving of the self into the true self, the idea that you and I in this form are, again, curves on the serpent, that we have, it's sort of getting back to the fish, that we have inherited this seed that we will pass on to our next incarnation. And I know that sounds really new agey and really kind of like buoy ooey claptrap, but of course we know that it's a Hindu, it's an aspect of Hinduism, of course, and Buddhism. Reincarnation is not necessarily crazy, I don't think. I mean, I don't think it's crazy, but I know that a lot of people, especially for the West, Westerners, I think, have a hard time understanding or dealing with reincarnation, because we are kind of taught from day one that you have one life and you need to live it to the fullest, and it's sort of this cheapness of life, and you don't ever let your life, with a capital L, mature. Yeah. So anywho, before I go on a diatribe of Western culture, um, of course, we also, you know, just to reiterate, we see Osiris's crown on him. We also see that, again, the energy coming out that is being released by the scythe is coming from his groin area. Again, a phallic reference. You know, yeah, I've always wondered if, you know, this is one of the sources for why the number 13 is supposedly unlucky. Um, and I'm sure that there's something more about 13 that I probably should say. Um, if you think, you know, the 13th path on the Tree of Life, which may or may not be interesting, is the priestess. Uh, I don't know. That's not an obvious connection, and I don't even know if it's one you're supposed to make. Um, but it is something to maybe think about. The wisdom that is gained from release. And I think the idea is that, the other idea rather, is that death is a wonderful thing, that death is a joy. Death is a source of bliss. Because by doing that, by dying, we allow ourselves to partake in a greater creation and a greater unfolding of selfhood. And I think also by dying, we are opened up to the additional parts of ourselves that we have closed ourselves off from. In my experience, the essence of the death card from meditation has been really quite beautiful in a way. And I think that's sort of what the connection to Tiphareth is getting at, and Netzach. I mean, both of those Sephiroth are beautiful in a way. Netzach is an idea of victory and emotional bliss and satisfaction. And Tiferet is about giving of the self, and this and the heart of the ego and the divine self and Christ, essentially, that there is no better way of expressing love for yourself and for those around you than by committing yourself to your true will and putting any other will aside. And that is the sacrifice of the passion. That is the sacrifice that Christ is trying to teach us. Again, we're coming out of the hanged man. And the hanged man is such a gross version of death when we look at it the way Crowley looked at it, with that kind of disdain for self-sacrifice. Death is a card about self-sacrifice, but it's more realistic. It's the idea that, you know, there are things that one accumulates as an individual that gets in the way of their true will. And these things must die. These things must be purged. And by doing that, by releasing yourself from those anxieties that you don't need, and by giving yourself to your true will, by inheriting your true will, again, the idea of inheritance, that is how you can do your greatest good for the world and those around you. That you can show the highest amount of human love for others and yourself at the same time, not by telling yourself, I am a weak, corrupt being, and therefore I deserve punishment, and therefore I should deny myself everything and anything, but by saying, I have a responsibility that I need to adhere to. You know, and the performance of that duty is what makes an individual beautiful. One creates a beautiful soul by doing that which they were made to do. You can only be that which you are. I mentioned that in another reading. I think it was, in another video. It might have been last night. I don't remember, gosh. So, yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly profound card. It's one of my favorites. I'm a Scorpio myself, so I kind of resonate with this card. And I do want to say that and reiterate that whenever my meditative experience of this card has been nothing but really moving, and honestly slightly ecstatic, and just very beautiful, like this sense of really profound happiness and gratitude. I don't know. It's a wonderful card. It really is, and I think he and she depicted it in a way that was really clear. I think this is the best image of death in any tarot deck ever. It is one of my all-time favorites, because it explains it in a way that Waite's version doesn't, or rather Pamela Coleman Smith's drawing, painting, not as good, not as good, hands down. And the idea that he's dancing is also a thing, that represents joy and constant motion. That all of these lives that we are living are just motions, undulations of the serpent life. What is it? Oh, I want to read for you the thing that Crowley writes about this card as kind of a summary or a mnemonic, just because it is so beautiful, I think. This is one of my favorite quotes from the entire Book of the Law, Book of Thoth, excuse me. For number 13, he says, the universe is change. Every change is the effect of an act of love. All acts of love contain pure joy. Die daily. Death is the apex of one curve of the snake life. Behold all opposites as necessary complements and rejoice. And I don't know. I think that sums it up absolutely perfectly. So don't be afraid to check this too, especially if I start talking crazy. Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope you found this interesting and informative, etc. Leave a comment below if you'd like, if you have any questions, things to add, and I will see you for number 14. Don't forget to like this so that more people can see it. Bye.